Today I really want to talk about giving a title to your book, naming your book. And this is not going to be a video that dives into the theory or the analysis of book titles as I like them or dislike them. We all know there are certain trends, and whether you choose to follow them or not, depending on the genre that you write in, they're just interesting to watch come and go, and very often they come from one very big book title that influences all the others. And it comes down to traditional publishers who decide to follow the trend in order to sell more of books that are within the same genre, and that they think, okay, if these people know that they enjoyed this one and this one has a similar book cover and book title, they'll know that it's somewhat similar and they'll be tempted to buy it as well. So that's a whole other topic in itself. Obviously, because I consider myself part of this little AuthorTube community, I'm here more to talk about, as writers, as future or already existing authors, how we name our own novels and how hard it is. This is going to be a little bit more of a sit-down, chatty video, and I'm going to try to make it quite short. I'm going to be doing this in several steps, and these steps are actually going to be relevant to my book titles, so every single time I'm going to try and figure out some examples to give you, whether books that have been published as examples or my own book titles as examples. Part 1 is the whip title. So when you first sit down to write a novel and you decide, okay, this is what it's going to be about, I have maybe a big outline, maybe I'm a pantser and I don't have an outline at all, but I have maybe characters or vibes or just a Pinterest board, we've all done this, you often think of what to name this first document, the blank page document that you're going to start, whether it's in Scrivener, Word doc, Google Docs, whatever you're using. You have a second where you're thinking, or more than a second, where you're thinking, what am I gonna name it? And the blank page syndrome does not happen just and solely for the first words you're gonna write for your novel. It also happens for, what should I name this project? And very often it ends up being some variation of project. So currently I'm writing a space opera romance novel, and I have dubbed it Space Princess Project. And if you look in my folder of ideas, I have a bunch of projects that are named things like Project Ghost. I had Project Rose for a while, which has now changed names. And very often my folders are actually named after the initial title, the very first way that I found to name this project, because I never changed the folder name. So I can actually go down and tell you, when it comes to the art of summoning demons, the first title that I had was Olive and Her Demons. That was it. Then I have another book that I had started writing that I've currently dropped. It's not dropped forever, but it's just not my priority at the moment, and that one I had dubbed Night Shifters series, because in my head it was going to be more than one novel, and it was going to span a whole last series with a bunch of romances in it, and all I knew was that it had to do with this urban fantasy world where the supernatural beings were called the night shifters and regular people, humans, were called day shifters. So I just dubbed the entire series Night Shifter series, and I never touched it again, so it's been a few months. I don't have a folder for Nights of Death because I started it all in Notion and then using First Draft Pro, which both of those are online programs and apps that don't require to have a physical folder on my desktop on my computer. So that's the first step to naming your project, and very often it will be something that is relevant to you specifically or to the project but doesn't actually really represent the genre that it's in or what it's talking about. Like Project Rose was literally just called Project Rose because the first name of my main character is Rose, and that is it. Like, it doesn't say anything about the universe it's set in or the type of magic that's being used or whatever else. There are outliers, obviously. There's exceptions to any rule, and sometimes you will have people who have found the perfect title for their novel immediately before even starting to put the first word in that blank page. And when it comes to, I think, Nights of Death, I think that was the case actually, because I outlined And I think when I outlined, I didn't have a title on that document. It was just a random new idea and title document in Notion. And then while I was outlining, I knew the characters involved were going to be those Knights of Death. That's what they were called, as a quartet of, you know, people. And therefore I was like, that's a great title for the book. And I'm just going to name it that. So it became the project title, and it has stayed since then. And I'm actually pretty happy with it, so I don't think it will actually change. So it's rare, but it happens, and it can also happen to you. Step 2, I would say, is probably to start writing. You have a project title, it is temporary, you can now write. You can outline, you can do whatever steps you want. Once you've done this, you may already start having some ideas. And if you do, don't let them go, put them down somewhere, write them down, because the brain is fallible and it's very possible that you'll forget if you don't write it down somewhere. So have a little, you know, whether it's a document in your project folder, whether it's an extra Notion page within, you know, that folder that is relevant to this one book, whatever it is, write down some of your book title ideas that are just popping in your head right then, because you may already have some. And I think when it comes to the type of projects that I write in, often that will be the case then, because even if it takes me much longer to figure it out, sometimes it will be, the title will be something that is relevant to the story that I'm figuring it out as I'm writing. And for instance, The Art of Summoning Demons. It was mostly because my main character Olive at some point inherits a big old sort of grimoire type of book from her grandfather, and I knew that the book itself, I wanted to call it the Ars Goetia, because it is one of the 5 books listed as being part of the Lesser Key of Solomon, which I was doing a lot of research when it comes to demonology and generally speaking the occult and sort of what people were doing in the 17th century when they sort of thought we can summon demons and also make them do our bidding type of thing. I think that topic is fascinating, which is why I was interested in writing about it in the first place. My book doesn't take place in the 17th century, but there's a lot of inspiration from that time and from what these people were doing, and obviously there is a huge cult sect in my book that will be extremely relevant and the main plot line of book 2. And I knew that I wanted to be inspired by those cults from the 17th century of sometimes very important and famous people who were interested in the occult. And there's a very famous grimoire of sorcery called the Lesser Key of Solomon, which supposedly lists all 72, I think it is, demons in the hierarchy of hell. And essentially it's got 5 books within it. One of them is called the Ars Goetia. I knew that the term Goetic arts sort of meant sorcery, but also summoning demons, because it basically was the book in the Lesser Key of Solomon that listed all 72 demons in that hierarchy of hell. So obviously my book having a lot to do with summoning demons, I was like, this is starting to make sense, and it sort of formulated in my head into this book title, this novel title, which I decided to keep because I think it's fucking great. The Art of Summoning Demons. And it's super relevant to the story in general. I think it's very indicative of the genre, and it is essentially what, like, it's the plot of what my main character must do in order to survive her first year of university. So all of that combined together made for the perfect book title for me, and I was very happy with that result. Step 3 / still step 2, because you may be doing that at the same time, is digging a little bit deeper in your own material. One of my projects I only named way after I was finished writing it, because for a while I was calling it Project Rose, and it stuck. And the problem was that I couldn't figure out something that felt relevant to this book. And then I also realized I wanted it to be a book series. So I'm still sort of struggling with whether I need to name the series or just book 1, and it becomes the overarching name of the series. And I think that might be the case for this book. So step 3 is sort of deciding, what are you writing? Is it a standalone? Is it a book series? Do you need a name for the book series, or do you just need a name for the first novel and you sort of know that it will then become the name for the series? There are certain books in certain genres that will follow this sort of formula. So recently I was reading a sci-fi book series that had the name of Galactic Bonds, I think, because it has the first 2 books focuses on one couple, and I think the next 2 books focuses on a different couple. So it made sense to name the series something, because the books are not gonna be the same story. So I think in particular when you have standalone books within a series, it's a good idea to name your series something different. However, when you have a trilogy, say, that is the direct continuation, say The Hunger Games, it is just called the Hunger Games trilogy because we all know that book 2 is the sequel directly to book 1. And so you don't really need an overarching name for the series. I'm going to do this hand gesture every single time I say the word overarching, but whether you need an overarching book title for your series or not, the point is to find a book title for your novel, first and foremost. So this is what I'm struggling with a little bit for my series Lockhart and Beckett, because I know it's going to be a series. I also know that every single book is going to be slightly different, but it's going to have the same recurring characters. So it's not going to be like individual standalone romances. I do want to have like a continuing thread throughout the series, and I want to have the same characters going through some stuff that takes them from book 1 to book 2 to book 3 that evolves as it happens. So that's definitely going to be the case, but every single book will have a different mystery almost to solve, and therefore I may need an overarching book series title. And that might actually be Lockhart and Beckett. Lockhart and Beckett used to be called Project Rose because my main character's name is Rose, and I ended up naming it Lockhart and Beckett because that is the name of the company that she joins, which fronts as just a simple solicitor's company, a big one that is in central London, and essentially my main character joins not knowing that it hides not underground because they're in the upper floors. Past a certain floor, you only have floors that are dedicated to solving supernatural crime, and all of the employees are supernatural beings themselves. At the end of the day, I feel like Lockhart and Beckett, the name of the agency, is sort of better suited to a series title. And I think the first book would need something maybe a little bit more relevant to the first mystery. I don't feel like the book title sort of gives away enough of maybe the genre or what the story is about, and I do enjoy when book titles do that. It's very easy when it comes to high fantasy because they have been following this formula that was sort of set up by George R. R. Martin's Game of Thrones, and a lot of them have been doing something really similarly with all of the Sarah J. Maas books, and all the follow-ups to that. A lot of people have been doing a blank off blank and blank. It's so common that it's actually a little bit annoying, and I don't particularly love those book titles, but I see how it sells the genre at the same time. It tells your audience immediately what your book is about. When it comes to Lockhart and Beckett, I think the title is just completely irrelevant to the genre, which is why I'm still digging my brain for something a little bit better. And one thing that is relevant to this book is that it's going to have a lot of absurdities, so it's going to lean a lot into what would a supernatural version of a corporation, of, you know, capitalism look like. I have been thinking recently, and this is not a final version, but I've been thinking a lot about the potential name An Office Full of Monsters. But I don't love the word monsters, and I just don't feel like that's appropriate to this book because it's not like that's a term I use at all. But I kind of like the vibe of it in general, and I think maybe I'll find something similar to this. And the reason why I'm leaning into this, and this is potentially your step 4 if you're still struggling, is taking inspiration from the media you're watching, you're reading, everything that is surrounding you. For An Office Full of Monsters, if it remains something like this, mostly recently I started watching a Korean drama called A Shop for Killers, and I just love the title. I think the title is brilliant because there's a little bit of absurdism in it, and it's sort of like a shop for killers, okay, weird, intriguing, you want to know more, and it's very relevant. It's literally what the show is about. So I really enjoy that kind of title, and that's why I took inspiration from it for this. If you're struggling, have a look at what others have done and see whether there is a formula that is being followed, like a blank of blank and blank. For me, the Vampire Academy, for instance, book series, has such a great title. The fact that the first book is just called Vampire Academy is so relevant to the story. It tells you what it does on the tin, and I love that. So that can be really good for you. And this is something that is maybe also relevant to genres, but I find that it's going to be easier to find a unique book title if you're trying to stay away from already used ones, especially famously used ones. It's going to be easier to make it unique if you make it longer and more specific. Things like the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. That is very long, it is very unique. There's not a single other book that is named the same. Things like To Sleep in a Sea of Stars by Paolini, love that book. And it is also really relevant to the genre. You immediately hear the word stars, you're like, sci-fi. Same with Her Majesty's Royal Coven. Great title, you immediately know with the word coven that this is going to have to do with witches. It's also unique, it is also very British sounding, so you immediately know the context, the location where this happens. And then another good sci-fi example is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. Again, with the word planet in it, you know it's sci-fi, and with the long title and the way that it's formulated, you sort of feel the coziness immediately. That is actually an essential element to the book series. Is it step 5, step 6? I'm not quite sure. Whatever it is, the next step I would say is to try and shed away the temporary project title that you have. That has proven difficult for me when it comes to Space Princess Project, because it is so specific to the genre, relevant to the story, and so perfect. I don't want to let it go. But it's not a book title. It is not a title that works. Maybe it could remain as a series title, but I doubt it. I feel like it's just not professional sounding enough. Space Princess, and they're not actually princesses. So it's interesting because for that one in particular, it's been really hard to let it go, because when I say Space Princess Project, everyone knows which project I'm talking about. It's not like Project Rose, where it was just named after a character. Here, you know it happens in space, you know you're gonna have royalty in space, or sort of something like royalty in space. And this is where I've been thinking already recently about what's gonna happen in book 2 and what's gonna happen in book 3, because this series is going to have several individual standalone romances for each book. And because of that, I had to think, what would I name book 1, 2, 3, etc.? And how do I make them sound similar and part of the same series? This is where I've been envisioning something where it's more a formula, like a format that is followed for the entire book series. And I love when books do this. And I was reading a similar, what's definitely going to be a comp title for me, which is a sci-fi series by Jesse Mihalik called The Consortium Rebellion. And each book is called, so the first one is Polaris Rising, then you have Aurora Blazing, and then Chaos Reigning. Each of the book's title, the first word in the title, is the name of the ship that belongs to one of the girls. I love the simplicity of the 2 words, but including in it, like, the words are really relevant to sci-fi and you know that it's going to be sci-fi. So I wanted to do something quite similar. I basically have a sort of magical system, because it is sci-fi fantasy, and they're called specialties, so each of the houses that sort of reign over this universe has a specialty. And my main character, Orion, in the first book, she is a tracker, so she can sort of, if she knows what she's looking for, she can find it wherever it is in the galaxy. And that's why I was sort of thinking of calling that one Star Catcher. And then each of the books after will follow a similar format. I don't know yet what the other books will be called, but it could be something like book 2 would be Infinity Explorer or something like that. But words that are relevant to the fact that this is about exploring space, and action words. So catcher, like a verb turned into a word. I like that it's catcher, maybe explorer, maybe voyager, etc. The danger of that is obviously there may be books that are called Starcatcher already, but if I name the series something more maybe relevant, a little bit more specific, that might also help. So I don't know whether this chatty piece about naming your novel has helped at all. If it did, I'd be happy to hear about it. If it didn't, but you want to chat some more about it and you want to discuss your book titles and what you're doing and get some feedback on them, feel free to leave a comment and we can chat about it in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this kind of content, I'd love to do some more. Leave a like because that will let me know. Consider subscribing to my channel, ring that bell, all that jazz, and I will see you guys in the next one.